She was mopping the floors while her stepsisters prepared for the Grandball until the Duke walked in. Chapter 1. The Invisible Girl. The lye soap burned Rena's hands raw, but the pain was a dull, distant thing, a welcome distraction from the sharper sting of humiliation. The real burn came from somewhere deeper, crawling up her neck as her stepsisters laughed, their voices like crystal bells, beautiful, hollow, and cutting. What followed was a cruelty of a different kind, hotter, sharper, deliberate. One of them, Viola Treadway draped in burgundy silk, accidentally swept her ivory fan across the bucket of dirty water. It sloshed across the freshly scrubbed marble, a murky tide that stopped just shy of Rena's worn gray skirts. "Oops," Viola purred, her lips curving into a smile that didn't touch her eyes. "So clumsy of me. Clean it up, Ash Girl." Ash Girl, the name they'd given her because she was nothing, less than nothing, a ghost who scrubbed the floors of the women who'd stolen her life. Fury, hot and wild, surged in her chest, a phantom limb of the power she'd spent years burying. Her body moved on instinct, her knuckles whitening on the handle of the scrub brush. "Just 1 second," a vicious part of her whispered. 1 second of showing them what a Mehan looks like when she stops bowing. But then the fear followed, cold and absolute. She forced her shoulders to slump. She had to swallow the rage, choke it down until it was just another knot of misery in her belly, because drawing attention in the Dendy household was a death sentence. She'd survived this long by becoming invisible, by being the girl who never looked up. To be a ghost was to be safe. To be a ghost was to be a coward. To be a ghost was the only way to stay alive. So she bowed her head. "Yes, my lady." Her voice was a rasp, a sound she hardly recognized as her own. She didn't know what scared her more, the women who tormented her, or the part of her that wanted to remind them that queens do not kneel forever. Deep down, she knew the truth. The real danger wasn't them. It was the sleeping bloodline inside her. As she reached for a fresh rag, Lady Arlene Twaddle descended the grand staircase, her silk skirts rustling like a serpent's scales. Her voice rang through the entrance hall, sharp and commanding. "Faster, Rena. His Grace will be here within the hour. I will not have a single smudge mar this household's reputation." "As if he'd even notice you here," Anita Raby added with a cruel smirk, adjusting her sapphire gown. "You're invisible, darling, just like always." The Grand Ball, the Duke's winter ball, was all anyone had spoken of for weeks. The house blazed with preparation. Seamstresses adjusted hems, maids curled hair, jewels were polished to blinding brilliance. Her stepsisters preened like peacocks, discussing which nobleman they'd ensnare, which title they'd claim. Rena scrubbed harder, her reflection distorted in the wet marble beneath her. She had no illusions. The ball was theirs to conquer. She was merely the shadow that kept their world gleaming. Then, without warning, the great oak doors swung open. A gust of winter air swept through the hall, carrying with it the scent of pine and cold stone. The household froze in practiced curtsies. Duke Percy Welsh entered like winter itself, imposing, unreadable, magnificent in charcoal and midnight blue. Behind him walked his advisors, the sharp-eyed Harvey Mitchell, the calculating Mosecropper, and the austere Bishop Macmillan. Rena's head was bowed, but she felt the temperature shift, felt the weight of a gaze she couldn't see. The Duke's boots, polished leather, unmistakably aristocratic, stopped inches from her hands, and a voice, deep, controlled, dangerous, spoke directly to her. "You, look at me." Rena's world narrowed to the bucket in her hands and the impossible command hanging in the air. "Don't look up. Never look up." But the voice came again, softer now, almost confused. "I said, look at me." Her heart hammered against her ribs. This was wrong. Dukes did not speak to servants. Dukes did not see servants. Yet she found herself slowly raising her eyes. And the moment their gazes met, storm gray colliding with golden fire, Rena felt the air shift. His eyes widened, just barely, just enough, as if he'd seen a ghost. Chapter 2. The Duke's gaze. The great hall of the Dendy estate smelled of beeswax and desperation, the cloying scent of a household trying too hard to impress. Percy stood at the threshold, his face an impassive mask, and watched the practiced curtsies of a family built on lies. He saw their petty cruelties. He saw the eldest daughter's calculated smile, the middle one's preening vanity. He saw the widow, Lady Arlene Twaddle, whose beauty couldn't quite mask the cold calculation in her eyes. He saw through all of it. But then he saw her, the girl kneeling on the marble floor, scrub brush in hand, head bowed in submission, gray dress, tangled dark hair, hands red and raw from lye soap. She was trying so hard to be invisible, and she was the only thing in the room he could see. Percy's breath caught. God help me. 3 years of searching. 3 years of whispers, of investigations, of following cold trails through corrupt officials and burned records. 3 years of hunting for the lost daughter of Lord Edmund Mahon, the nobleman executed for a treason he didn't commit, whose family had been accidentally killed in a fire. The official record said she was dead. The portrait in his study said otherwise. And the girl kneeling before him with her storm-gray eyes and the stubborn tilt to her chin, with her delicate features and the phantom weight of a crown she didn't know she carried, confirmed what he'd suspected. Rena Dendy wasn't a servant. She was Lady Rena of Mahon, the rightful heir to a fortune, the key to exposing a conspiracy that reached to the crown itself. And if he was right about who had orchestrated her family's murder, she was also the single most dangerous person in this room. He watched her hands tighten on the scrub brush, saw the flash of defiance in her eyes before she buried it under years of practiced submission. It was there for only a second, but it was there. Fire, his instincts whispered. There's fire under that ash. His advisors, Harvey, Mose, Bishop Macmillan, had counseled him against coming here personally. Send an investigator, Harvey had said. Don't risk exposing your interest. But Percy had needed to see for himself, needed to confirm that the girl who cleaned floors was the same girl whose bloodline could start a war. He'd come expecting a broken thing, a traumatized waif too damaged to be useful. He'd found a survivor. Around him, the Dendy women postured and preened, each hoping to catch his eye. They were fools. True power didn't announce itself in silk and jewels. True power scrubbed floors and survived. His father had ruled with fear and brutality, and it had earned him nothing but enemies and an early grave. Percy had vowed to be different, to build a legacy not on blood, but on strategy. And strategy required the right pieces on the board. You, he said, his voice cutting through the practiced silence. Look at me. He needed to see her eyes, needed to confirm what his instincts already knew. She resisted wisely, instinctively, but ultimately obeyed. And when her gaze met his, Percy felt the world tilt. Those eyes. He'd seen them in the portrait, but the portrait hadn't captured the intelligence behind them, the buried fury, the carefully hidden strength. She was magnificent, and she had absolutely no idea. Behind her, Lady Arlene's face had gone white. The widow knew. She knew exactly who this girl was, and she knew Percy had just figured it out. The game had begun. Percy asked her name, heard her whisper, Rena Dendy, and felt a cold satisfaction settle in his chest. Dendy, the widow's name, not Mahon. She'd buried the girl's identity so thoroughly that even the girl herself seemed to believe the lie. But blood remembers, and Percy would make sure it sang. Interesting, he murmured, letting his gaze linger on her just long enough to plant the seed of uncertainty in everyone's mind. He had made his opening move. Now he just had to make sure the board didn't catch fire before he could execute his plan. Because he wasn't just choosing a political pawn, he was choosing the queen. And the only question that mattered was, when she finally remembered who she was, would she forgive him for knowing all along? But to understand what happened next, you need to know the story that began 3 years ago, on the night the Mahon family died. The Dendy Manor had once been Rena's childhood paradise, filled with her late father's laughter and her mother's gentle songs. But death had stolen them both, leaving Rena at the mercy of her father's widow, Lady Arlene Twaddle, a woman whose beauty masked a heart of ice. She remembered fragments, like shattered glass, her father, Lord Edmund, teaching her Latin in his study, her mother braiding her hair while singing old ballads. The warmth of being loved, of being seen. Then came the fire. The official story was simple, tragic, convenient. Lord Edmund Dendy and his wife Catherine perished in an accidental blaze. Their young daughter Rena, a stepdaughter from Edmund's first marriage, survived only through Lady Arlene's charity. But Rena's memories whispered different truths. Truths she'd learned to bury deep where even she couldn't reach them, because remembering was dangerous. Remembering could get you killed. Lady Arlene's daughters ruled the manor like empresses now. Viola Treadway, draped in burgundy silk, wore cruelty like perfume. Anita Raby, shimmering in sapphire blue, delighted in Rena's humiliation. Even Ione Mehan, the youngest stepsister in emerald green, had learned to look past Rena as though she were furniture. The transformation had been swift. Within weeks of her father's death, Rena's silk dresses became rough wool. Her bedroom became a pallet in the servants' quarters. Her name spoken with love and pride became Ash Girl, spoken with contempt. She learned to survive by becoming invisible. She learned that silence was safer than speech. She learned that ghosts couldn't be hurt if no one remembered they'd once been alive. For 3 years, she scrubbed the floors of her own home. For 3 years, she bowed her head to women who'd stolen everything. For 3 years, she buried the name Mehan so deep that even she almost forgot it had ever been hers. Almost. But blood remembers what the mind forces itself to forget. And on the morning of the Duke's grand winter ball, when the great oak doors swung open and Percy Welsh's golden eyes found her kneeling in a puddle of dirty water, that buried blood began to sing. Rena's world narrowed to the bucket in her hands and the boots inches from her face, polished leather, unmistakably aristocratic. Her heart hammered against her ribs like a trapped bird. Don't look up. Never look up. But the voice came again, softer now, almost confused. I said, "Look at me." She had no choice. Against every instinct screaming for self-preservation, Rena slowly raised her head. The world tilted. Duke Percy Welsh stood before her tall, imposing, draped in charcoal and midnight blue that made him look like winter given human form. His face was carved stone, all sharp angles and aristocratic planes. But his eyes burned with something she couldn't name. Not disgust, not pity. Recognition, as if he'd been searching for her his entire life. Their gazes locked, and for one impossible heartbeat, Rena forgot to breathe. That face? Percy's chest constricted. God help me, it's her face. He'd spent 3 years staring at a faded portrait in his study, a small painting recovered from the ruins of Mehan Manor. A little girl with storm-gray eyes and a stubborn chin, the daughter of a nobleman executed for treason he didn't commit. Lady Rena of Mehan, dead, according to official records, buried with her family in a fire that had been far too convenient. But the girl kneeling before him, older now, hollowed by suffering, dressed in servant's rags, wore that same face like a ghost stepping out of history. The delicate bone structure, the proud line of her jaw, even bowed in submission. The eyes that held too much intelligence for a simple servant, too much buried fire. She was alive, and she had no idea who she was. The entrance hall had gone deathly silent. Rena felt the weight of every eye in the room. Viola's ivory fan had stopped mid-flutter, frozen in shock. Anita's mouth hung open in unladylike surprise. Even young Ione looked confused, her emerald skirts trembling as she shifted nervously. But it was Lady Arlene's face that sent ice through Rena's veins. The color had drained from her stepmother's cheeks, leaving her beautiful features stark and pale. Her hands, usually so graceful, had clenched into fists in the folds of her gown. She looked terrified. Behind the Duke, his 3 advisors exchanged loaded glances. The sharp-eyed one, Harvey Mitchell, if Rena remembered the whispered gossip, correctly leaned closer to the calculating, cold-faced man beside him, Mose Cropper. They were silent, but their body language screamed volumes. The austere Bishop Macmillan simply watched, his expression unreadable. Something was happening, something Rena didn't understand. "Your name," the Duke said quietly, his voice cutting through the silence like a blade through silk. Rena's throat was dry. "Rena Dendy, Your Grace." She saw it, the flash of something in his eyes. His jaw tightened almost imperceptibly. "Dendy," he repeated, his tone flat. His gaze flicked past her, landing on Lady Arlene with the precision of an arrow finding its mark. The widow moved then, descending the stairs with practiced grace, her mask of maternal concern sliding smoothly into place. "Your Grace," Arlene said, her voice honey-sweet. "Forgive the confusion. Rena is just a servant girl, my late husband's ward. A charity case, really. Nothing of consequence." She laughed, light and dismissive. "I'm afraid she is not accustomed to such distinguished company. It's made her quite tongue-tied. Nothing of consequence." The words landed like stones. But the Duke wasn't looking at Arlene. His gaze remained fixed on Rena, studying her with an intensity that made her skin prickle. "Your late husband," Percy said slowly, still not breaking eye contact with Rena, "was Lord Edmund Dendy, was he not?" "Yes, Your Grace, a good man taken too soon. And before your marriage?" "What was his first wife's name?" The question hung in the air like a noose. Arlene's smile tightened. "Catherine, Your Grace. She passed in childbirth, along with the babe. A tragedy." It was a lie. Rena didn't know how she knew, but she knew. Her memories of her early childhood were fragments, smoke and shadows. But there had been a woman, soft hands, gentle songs, a voice that called her my star. That woman's name had not been Catherine. Percy's expression remained neutral, but something flickered behind those golden eyes. He'd caught the lie, too. He finally turned his full attention to Arlene, and the temperature in the room seemed to drop. "Lady Twaddle," he said, his voice carrying the weight of absolute authority, "I shall be attending your gathering before the grand ball this evening. A small affair, I trust? I prefer intimate company for such occasions." Arlene's face was a portrait of polite surprise. "Your Grace, we would be honored, of course." "I trust," Percy continued, his eyes sliding back to Rena with deliberate slowness, "that all members of your household will be present?" The air thickened. Arlene's smile became brittle, porcelain thin. "Of course, Your Grace. Though I'm afraid Rena has duties. Servants don't typically attend such gatherings." "Then relieve her of them." It wasn't a request. It was a command, delivered with the casual certainty of a man who had never been denied anything in his life. Percy took a step closer to Rena, and she felt her breath catch. He extended a gloved hand, not to help her up, but as a gesture of, "What? Promise? Threat?" "I look forward to speaking with you this evening, Miss Dendy," he said softly. His voice meant only for her. "I find myself curious about your family history." Then he turned on his heel and strode toward the door, his advisors falling into step behind him like shadows. The great oak doors closed with a thunderous boom, and Rena was left kneeling on the wet marble, her heart racing, her mind spinning with questions she didn't have words for. Behind her, she heard Lady Arlene's sharp intake of breath. When Rena finally dared to look up, her stepmother was staring at her with an expression she'd never seen before. Pure, murderous rage. "Get up," Arlene hissed, her voice shaking. "Get up right now." Rena scrambled to her feet, her legs weak. Arlene's hand shot out, gripping Rena's arm with bruising force. Her perfect mask had shattered completely, revealing the monster beneath. "You stupid, stupid girl," she whispered, her breath hot against Rena's ear. What have you done? Chapter 3. Secrets and Chains. The moment the Duke's carriage disappeared down the tree-lined lane, Arlene's mask shattered like porcelain striking stone. She moved with terrifying speed, her hand tangling in Rena's hair and wrenching her head back. Pain exploded across Rena's scalp as she was dragged from the entrance hall, away from the shocked gasps of the servants, toward the narrow servants' corridor. "You stupid, stupid girl," Arlene hissed, her voice venomous. "What did you say to him? What did you do?" "Nothing," Rena gasped, stumbling over her own feet. "I didn't." "Liar!" Arlene's free hand cracked across Rena's face, the sound echoing in the narrow space. "He looked at you as if he knew. 3 years. 3 years of keeping you buried, keeping you silent, and you ruin everything in a single glance." Rena tasted copper. Her cheek throbbed. "I don't understand." "Of course you don't." Arlene shoved her toward the cellar door. "You never did, just like your fool of a father." The words hit harder than the blow. "Your father, not my late husband, not Lord Dendy. Your father." The memories came in fragments, jagged pieces of a mirror Rena had spent 3 years trying not to reassemble. She was 7 years old, sitting in her father's study while he taught her Latin conjugations. A noble's mind must be as sharp as her blade. "Little star," he'd said, his laugh warm and rich. Her mother, her real mother, with auburn hair and gentle hands, singing while she braided Rena's hair. "You are a Mahon, my darling, never forget. No matter what comes, you carry that name in your bones." The fire. God, the fire. Smoke choking her lungs, flames licking at the manor's east wing. Her mother pushing her toward the servants' exit, screaming for her to run. The heat, the screaming, the sound of timber collapsing. And afterward Lady Arlene, suddenly in control, her beautiful face etched with false grief. "Your parents are gone, Rena. The fire took them both. But I will care for you, in exchange for certain considerations." The night Rena's gray silk dresses became gray wool rags. The night her bedroom became a pallet in the servants' quarters. The night Rena Mahon became Rena the Ash Girl. The night she learned that survival meant forgetting who she'd been. Arlene threw open the cellar door and shoved Rena down the steep stone stairs. Rena caught herself on the rough wall, her palms scraping against cold stone. The cellar was damp and dark, smelling of earth and mildew. A single lamp flickered near the wine racks, casting dancing shadows. "Stay here," Arlene commanded. "Don't move. Don't make a sound." She ascended the stairs, and Rena heard the bolt slide home with a final, condemning click. But not before she heard voices above Viola and Anita, their tones sharp with confusion. "Mother, what is happening?" Viola demanded. Why did the Duke stare at that creature? "Sit down, both of you." Arlene's voice was cold, controlled once more. "That girl is more dangerous than you know." "She's a servant," Anita scoffed. "She's nothing." "She is Lady Rena of Mahon," Arlene said flatly. "Daughter of Lord Edmund Mahon, who was executed for treason 3 years ago. Or rather, who was accused of treason by men who wanted his lands, his fortune, and his silence." Rena's breath stopped. Mahon, the name her mother had whispered, the name carved into the sunstone pendant Rena kept hidden beneath her mattress. "But she's dead," Viola whispered. The records say what I paid them to say," Arlene snapped. "Her father married me to gain a political alliance. What he didn't know was that I was working for Lord Joel Nickel, who needed the Mahon fortune to fund his shipping empire. Edmund discovered the plot. He was going to expose us all." Silence. Then Anita's voice, small and frightened. "What did you do?" "What I had to do. Edmund and his meddling wife died in a fire. Very tragic. Very accidental. And their daughter, well, who would look for a dead heiress among the servants?" Rena's legs gave out. She sank to the cold cellar floor, her mind reeling. Her father hadn't committed treason. He'd been murdered. By the woman who now controlled his estate. By the woman Rena had called stepmother. For 3 years. If the Duke discovers her identity, Arlene continued, if he connects her to the Mahon name, everything unravels. The estate reverts to her. The fortune is hers. And we, her voice dropped to something dark and final. We hang for murder and conspiracy. Then what do we do? Viola's voice shook. Tonight, she stays locked away. I'll tell the Duke she fell ill. Tomorrow, after the ball season ends and his attention moves elsewhere, we handle this permanently. Rena's blood turned to ice. You mean, Anita couldn't finish? I mean, Arlene said coldly, that Rena Mahon has been dead for 3 years. It's time we made it official. Hours passed. The cellar grew colder. Above, Rena heard the sounds of the gathering, music, laughter, the clinking of crystal. The Duke was there, waiting for her. And she was trapped. Her hands were numb, her wrists bound with rough rope that Arlene had tied before leaving. Her mind spun with revelations that felt too large, too impossible. I am Lady Rena of Mahon. My father was murdered, and I'm next. Then she heard footsteps on the cellar stairs. Heavy, deliberate. Male, not Arlene, not her stepsisters, someone else. Rena pressed herself against the cold stone wall, her heart thundering. A figure emerged from the darkness, tall, broad-shouldered, scarred. He carried a lamp that cast harsh shadows across a face that had seen violence and survived. His eyes found her in the gloom. Lady Mahon, I presume, he said, his voice a low rumble. The Duke sent me. Rena's breath came in shallow gasps. Who are you? The man knelt before her, pulling a knife from his belt. For one terrifying moment, she thought he'd come to finish Arlene's work. Instead, he began sawing at the ropes binding her wrists. My name is Zeb Kinghead, he said quietly, and His Grace wants you alive. The ropes fell away. The question is, Zeb continued, his scarred face unreadable, do you trust him enough to leave this cellar? Or would you rather stay here and wait for your stepmother to make good on her promise? Rena stared at this stranger, this Zeb Kinghead, sent by a duke who recognized her face but hadn't explained why. Friend or foe? Rescuer or trap? She had seconds to decide. And everything, her life, her name, her future, hung in the balance. Chapter 4. The Shadow Guard. Rena pressed against the cold stone wall, her heart thundering so loudly she was certain he could hear it. The man descended into the lamplight, tall, scarred, dangerous. A fighter's body wrapped in dark leather, a face that had seen violence and dealt it in equal measure. My name is Zeb Kinghead, he said, his voice surprisingly gentle for someone who looked like death incarnate. I'm here to get you out. Why should I believe you? Rena's voice shook, but she forced steel into it. How do I know the Duke didn't send you to finish what my stepmother started? Zeb's scarred mouth curved into something that might have been a smile. If His Grace wanted you dead, Lady Mahon, you'd have been dead 3 years ago. He's known who you were for months. The words hit like a physical blow. He knew? He suspected. Then he confirmed. Zeb moved closer, his blade still in hand, not threatening, but ready. His Grace sent me to watch this household a week ago. I've been in the walls, the shadows. I heard your stepmother's plans. His expression darkened. I saw what she did to you tonight. Rena's wrists throbbed where the ropes had cut into skin. Then why didn't he warn me? Because he needed proof. And because Zeb knelt before her, his knife moving to the bonds at her wrists. The Duke trusts no one. Not after what happened with Monty Duncan. The ropes fell away. Rena's hands were numb, fingers tingling as blood rushed back. Zeb shrugged off his heavy cloak and draped it over her shoulders. The wool was warm, smelling of horse and winter pine. The Duke wants answers, Lady Mahon. But more than that, he wants you safe. The question is, do you want to live? They moved through the servant passages like ghosts, Zeb's hand firm on her elbow, guiding her through darkness she knew by heart. Above them, the gathering continued, music filtering through the floorboards, laughter echoing in spaces meant for silence. "Who is Monty Duncan?" Rena whispered as they navigated a narrow corridor behind the kitchens. Zeb's jaw tightened. The woman his grace was betrothed to marry. Beautiful, charming, a traitor. He paused at a corner, listening before pulling her forward. She sold his military strategies to his enemies during the border conflicts 2 years ago. Good men died because the Duke trusted the wrong person. And now he doesn't trust anyone. Can you blame him? Zeb glanced back at her, his scarred face shadowed. His grace believes you're the key to exposing a conspiracy that goes deeper than your father's murder. Lord Joel Nickel wanted your family's fortune, yes. But he needed it to fund something larger. Something that threatens the crown itself. Rena's mind spun. My father? He found evidence? His grace thinks so. And he thinks you might know where it is. I don't, Rena started. Then stopped. A memory, sharp and sudden. Her mother's voice, urgent through smoke and flames. The library. Behind the globe. Remember, Rena? Behind the globe. She'd never understood. Had thought it the desperate ramblings of a dying woman. But what if it wasn't? They reached the servants' exit, a small door hidden behind a trellis of dead winter roses. Zeb eased it open, and cold air rushed in, stealing Rena's breath. A figure materialized from the shadows beyond another man, darker-skinned, dangerous, leading 2 horses. Ramon Drogues, Zeb said quietly. My partner. Ramon's eyes swept over Rena, assessing, calculating. Lady Mahon, we need to move. The widow has hired men mercenaries from the looks of them. They're searching the grounds. As if summoned by his words, Rena heard its shouts in the distance, the baying of hounds. They're hunting me, she whispered. Then we run. Zeb lifted her onto one of the horses with surprising gentleness. 5 miles to the palace. Can you ride? Rena's hands found the reins. Muscle memory from a childhood that felt like another life. Yes. Good. Zeb swung onto his own mount. Because if they catch us, the Duke can't protect you. Not out here. Ramon was already moving, his horse disappearing into the tree line. Stay close, Zeb commanded. And whatever happens, don't stop. They rode. The winter woods were a blur of skeletal branches and frozen earth. Rena's bare feet, she'd lost her worn shoes in the cellar, pressed against the stirrups, going numb with cold. Her lungs burned. Behind them, the shouts grew closer. A crossbow bolt hissed past her head, embedding itself in a tree trunk. Faster! Zeb roared. Rena leaned low over the horse's neck, her fingers tangled in its mane, and rode as if the hounds of hell were at her heels. Because they were. They burst from the forest onto the main road just as the palace came into view, a massive structure of white stone and golden windows blazing against the night sky. Music drifted on the cold air. The grand ball had begun. Ramon veered off toward the stables. Zeb pulled his horse to a halt at the gates. And Rena did the same, her mount's sides heaving. Palace guards stepped forward, hands on sword hilts, then recognized Zeb and waved them through. Rena slid from the horse, her legs nearly buckling. She was barefoot, bleeding from a dozen small cuts, dressed in servant's rags and a guard's cloak. Her hair hung in tangled ropes down her back. She looked like exactly what she was, a fugitive. Zeb dismounted, his expression serious. The Duke is waiting inside, but Lady Mahon. He caught her arm, stopping her. If you enter that ballroom, there's no going back. Your life will never be your own again. The moment you step through those doors, you become a piece on a very dangerous board. Rena looked at the palace. Through the tall windows, she could see them, the nobility of the realm, spinning in silk and jewels, living lives of ease and privilege. The life she should have had. The life that had been stolen from her. She heard the music, smelled the winter roses decorating the entrance, felt the weight of the choice pressing down on her shoulders. Behind her, she could still hear the distant sounds of pursuit, Arlene's hired killers, hunting her through the darkness. Ahead, through those golden doors, was the Duke who'd known her secret and said nothing. A man who wanted to use her for his own purposes. just as Arlene had used her father. Another cage, just prettier than the last. It was never my own to begin with, Rena whispered. She took a step forward, then another. Her bare feet left small, bloody prints on the pristine white stone steps. She didn't look back. Zeb followed at a respectful distance as Rena walked through the palace gates, past the shocked guards, toward the massive doors of the grand ballroom. Somewhere inside, the Duke was waiting, and Rena was done hiding. Chapter 5. The Ballroom. The palace ballroom was a cathedral of light. Chandeliers dripping crystal cast rainbows across marble floors. Nobility swirled in silk and jewels emerald, sapphire, ruby, gold, a kaleidoscope of wealth and privilege. Music wrapped around laughter like ivy around stone. The orchestra playing a waltz that seemed to exist in a world entirely separate from Rena's reality. She stood in the doorway, a ghost among goddesses, barefoot, bleeding, dressed in rags and a guard's cloak. And then the music stopped. The silence was a physical thing, pressing against her eardrums. One by one, heads turned. Conversations died mid-sentence. The spinning dancers froze like mannequins. Every eye in the ballroom fixed on her. "Who is that?" someone whispered, the words carrying in the terrible quiet. "A beggar? How dare she? Is that blood on her feet? Guards, remove her." The whispers rippled through the crowd like poison spreading through water. Shock, disgust, outrage. How dare this creature interrupt their perfect evening? Rena's legs threatened to buckle. Every instinct screamed at her to run, to hide, to become invisible again. Then she saw him. Duke Percy Welsh stood at the far end of the hall, flanked by Harvey Mitchell and Mose Cropper. He was dressed in formal black and silver, a figure of absolute authority among the glittering crowd. And he was staring directly at her. Their eyes met across the expanse of marble and nobility, across the chasm of class and blood and 3 years of lies. The world held its breath. Percy moved. Each step was deliberate, measured, echoing in the silence. The crowd parted before him like the sea before a ship's bow, instinctive, automatic, no one daring to block the path of the most powerful man in the room. He crossed the entire length of the ballroom, and with every step, Rena's heart beat faster. He stopped before her, so close she could see the gold flecks in his eyes, the tension in his jaw. For one impossible moment, uncertainty flickered across his face, as if he, too, was standing on the edge of a precipice, about to take a leap that would change everything. Then his expression hardened into resolve. He extended his hand, gloved, elegant, steady. "Lady Rena of Mahon," he said, his voice carrying through the silent ballroom like a bell. "I've been searching for you for a very long time." The room exploded. Gasps, accusations, denial. The whispers became a roar. "Mahon? The traitor's daughter? She's dead," the records. "This is some kind of trick." Bishop Macmillan pushed through the crowd, his austere face flushed with confusion and something that looked like anger. "Your Grace, this is madness. The Mahon line died with the traitor 3 years ago." Percy didn't look away from Rena. His hand remained extended, waiting. "Take it," he said quietly. "Meant only for her. Trust me, just this once." Rena looked at his hand, at the hundreds of faces staring at her with shock and horror, at the life of shadows she'd lived for 3 years, at the name she'd been too afraid to speak. She placed her small, dirt-stained hand in his. His fingers closed around hers, warm and strong, and he turned to face the court. "Lord Edmund Mahon was no traitor," Percy declared, his voice ringing with absolute authority. "He was murdered for discovering the truth about military supply corruption that reached to the highest levels of government. His wife was murdered to silence her, and his daughter," he lifted their joined hands, "was stolen, hidden, erased from history by the very people who orchestrated her family's destruction. I am Rena Mahon." The words came from her own throat, shaking but clear. Rena stepped forward, standing beside Percy rather than behind him. "I am the daughter of Lord Edmund and Lady Margaret Mahon, and I remember everything." Her voice grew stronger with each word. "I remember my father teaching me Latin. I remember my mother's songs. I remember the night they died, not in some tragic accident, but in a fire meant to destroy evidence. A fire set to cover murder." The ballroom doors burst open with a thunderous crash. Lady Arlene swept in, a vision of maternal outrage in midnight blue silk. Viola, Anita, and Ione followed, their faces carefully arranged into masks of shock and concern. "Your Grace." Arlene's voice was silk over steel, smooth and deadly. "I apologize for this disturbance. I don't know what lies this poor girl has told you, but she is disturbed, delusional." She pressed a hand to her heart, the picture of wounded dignity. "I've cared for her out of charity for 3 years, and this is how she repays me? With wild accusations and fantasy?" She moved toward Rena, arms outstretched, as if to embrace a wayward child. "Come, Rena, let's get you somewhere quiet." "Stop." Percy's single word cracked like a whip. Arlene froze mid-step. Percy's expression was ice and iron. "Then you won't mind if Bishop Macmillan examines the family records you've kept? The marriage certificates? The death certificates that list Lady Rena among the dead?" Arlene's face went white. "Or perhaps," Percy continued, each word precisely placed like a blade finding its target, "we should discuss the fire at Mahon Manor 3 years ago. The one you reported as an unfortunate accident?" He paused. "The one that destroyed all evidence of the late Lord Mahon's investigations into Lord Joel Nicholl's shipping embezzlements?" The color drained from Arlene's beautiful face, leaving her looking suddenly gaunt, suddenly old. At the edges of Rena's vision, she saw movement, Zeb Kinghead and Ramon Drogas, moving with silent efficiency to block the exits. The trap was closing, and there was nowhere left for Lady Arlene Twaddle to run. Percy's hand tightened on Rena's. "I think," he said quietly, dangerously, "it's time for the truth. Don't you?" Chapter 6. Unmasking the Serpent. The ballroom had transformed from a celebration into a trial. The orchestra sat silent, instruments abandoned. The nobles who had been dancing now pressed against the walls, their faces a mixture of shock, fascination, and horror. In the center of the marble floor, surrounded by guards and the weight of 3 years of lies, stood Lady Arlene Twaddle. She was a serpent with nowhere left to hide. Bishop Macmillan stepped forward, his austere face grave. In his hands, he carried a leather portfolio thick with documents. "Your Grace," he said, addressing Percy but speaking loud enough for all to hear, "our investigators have uncovered substantial evidence." He opened the portfolio. Forged death certificates listing Lady Rena among the deceased. Financial records showing the systematic transfer of the Mahon fortune into Lady Twaddle's personal accounts. And testimony, he pulled out several sealed letters from no fewer than 8 dismissed servants who witnessed Lady Twaddle's treatment of the young lady. A murmur rippled through the crowd. "These are lies." Arlene's voice cracked, her composure finally shattering. "Fabrications from disgruntled servants seeking revenge." "Are they?" Percy's voice was deadly calm. "Then perhaps your daughters can shed light on the truth." All eyes turned to Viola and Anita. The 2 young women stood frozen, their beautiful faces pale with terror. They looked at their mother, then at each other, then at the guards, blocking every exit. We didn't know," Viola whispered, her voice trembling. "Mother told us Rena was just a ward, a charity case. We didn't know about the Mahon name, about the—" She couldn't finish. "You're lying," Arlene hissed. "Don't you dare." "She kept secrets from us," Anita cut in, desperation making her voice shrill. "We knew nothing of murder, nothing of conspiracy. You have to believe us." Ione, the youngest, stood apart from her sisters, trembling like a leaf. Tears streamed down her face. "I heard something," she whispered, so quietly the room had to strain to listen. 2 months ago, Mother was in her study with a man I didn't recognize. They were arguing about making something permanent, about loose ends. She looked at Rena, her eyes brimming with guilt. I was too frightened to say anything. I'm so sorry. Arlene's mask cracked completely. You stupid ungrateful. She lunged for the nearest exit, her silk skirts flying. Zeb Kinghead stepped into her path, immovable as stone. His scarred hand closed around her wrist, stopping her mid-flight. Going somewhere, my lady? His voice was granite. Arlene thrashed against his grip, then went still. When she looked up, her beautiful face had transformed into something ugly and desperate. You want the truth? She spat, her voice raw. Fine, yes. I was hired by Lord Joel Nickel. Yes, he wanted the Mahon lands for his shipping empire. Edmund Mahon was investigating corruption in the military supply chains. Corruption that would have exposed half the nobility in this room. The crowd gasped. So I did what I was paid to do, Arlene continued, her voice rising to a shriek. I seduced him. I married him. I waited for the perfect moment. And when his meddling wife discovered the truth, I burned them both. She laughed, a broken, terrible sound. And the girl? I kept her alive because breaking her spirit was more satisfying than killing her. I wanted her to suffer. The silence that followed was absolute. Rena stepped forward, her bare feet silent on the cold marble. She stopped inches from Arlene, looking directly into the eyes of the woman who had destroyed her life. You took everything, Rena said quietly. My name, my parents, my home, 3 years of my life. She paused, and when she spoke again, her voice was steel. But you couldn't take my soul. That was always mine. Arlene's face twisted with hatred. Percy's voice cut through the moment like a blade. Lady Arlene Twaddle, you are under arrest for murder, conspiracy, and treason. You will be held in the palace dungeons until your trial. Guards moved forward, seizing Arlene's arms. She didn't resist, all fight drained from her. As they dragged her toward the exit, Percy turned to Viola and Anita. You will be stripped of all claims to the Mahon estate and sent to live with your father's relatives in the north. Be grateful I'm showing mercy. The 2 sisters, faces white with shock, curtsied and fled. Only Ione remained, trembling and small in her emerald gown. Rena looked at her, this girl who was barely younger than herself, who had been raised by a monster just as Rena had been. You were a child, Rena said gently. Like me. You can stay at the manor, if you choose differently now. Ione's eyes widened with disbelief and gratitude. She dropped into a deep curtsy and whispered, Thank you, my lady. An hour later, Rena sat in a private antechamber, the sounds of the ball resuming in the distance. The nobility had gotten their scandal. Now they wanted their entertainment. Percy entered, closing the door behind him. In the quiet, he looked exhausted, the weight of the evening etched into his face. He sat across from her, not speaking for a long moment. Your father wrote to me, he finally said, 3 weeks before he died. He suspected the conspiracy went deeper than Joel Nickel to members of the Crown's own council. He'd found evidence, but he didn't trust anyone enough to reveal it. Percy's eyes met hers. He said if anything happened to him, I should find his daughter. She would know where to look. Rena's breath caught. I was 7 years old. How would I? Then the memory surfaced, sharp and clear. Her mother, coughing through smoke, gripping Rena's shoulders. The library, behind the globe. The truth is there. Tell no one. Do you understand? Tell no one. The library, Rena whispered. At Mahon Manor. Behind the globe. Percy leaned forward, his intensity radiating like heat. What's behind the globe? I don't know. I never looked. I thought she was delirious from the smoke. Rena's hands trembled. But if the evidence is still there, we have to go back, Percy said immediately. To Mahon Manor. It's been 3 years. The manor was damaged in the fire. It might be destroyed. Or it might not. Percy stood, began pacing. If we find that evidence, if it proves Crown involvement in your father's murder, in the conspiracy, We'll be starting a war, Rena finished quietly. Percy stopped, turned to face her. The air between them crackled with possibility, danger, truth, and something neither of them had expected to find in this night of revelations. Trust. Rena stood, meeting his gaze without flinching. Then we go to war. Percy's expression shifted from calculation to something warmer, something that made her heart stutter. We? He asked softly. You wanted a partner, didn't you? Rena's voice was steady. Someone to help you expose the truth. You found her. A slow smile crossed Percy's face, genuine, devastating. Then we leave at dawn, he said, for Mayhan Manor, and whatever truth we find there. Chapter 7. The Beginning. 3 days later, Rena returned to the manor she once called home. But she did not return as a servant. She arrived in a carriage bearing the Duke's crest, dressed in deep, forest green silk, mourning colors for the House of Mayhan. Her hair was clean, braided, adorned with silver pins. Her hands, still healing from years of lye soap, were gloved in soft leather. She was Lady Rena of Mayhan, and Duke Percy Welsh rode at her side. The manor loomed before them, gray stone and broken windows, the east wing still blackened from fire. It looked smaller than she remembered, diminished by time and tragedy. Haunted. Are you ready? Percy asked quietly. Rena looked at the home where she'd been born, where she'd learned to read and ride and dream, where she'd watched everything burn. I have to be, she whispered. Inside, dust motes danced in shafts of pale sunlight. The entrance hall where she'd scrubbed floors just days ago now felt like a tomb. Their footsteps echoed on marble she knew intimately, every crack, every stain. Rena led Percy through familiar corridors to her father's library. The door was warped from heat damage but still intact. She pushed it open. The room was exactly as she remembered, floor-to-ceiling shelves, a massive oak desk, and in the corner, the great brass globe her father had used to teach her geography. There, she said, pointing with a trembling hand. Percy moved to the globe, examining it. I don't see. Behind it, there's a panel in the wall. Together, they shifted the heavy globe aside. Percy's fingers found the seam in the wood paneling, pressed, and a section of wall swung inward with a soft click. Inside the hidden compartment, a leather satchel, untouched for 3 years. Rena's hands shook as she lifted it out. Inside were letters, ledgers, maps, all in her father's careful handwriting. She spread them across the desk, and Percy leaned close, his sharp eyes scanning the contents. God in heaven, he breathed. This is everything. Military supply routes, bribes paid to judges, financial records showing embezzlement of crown funds. He picked up a map marked with red ink. 12 names. 12 noblemen involved in the conspiracy. Rena barely heard him. Her eyes had found a sealed envelope at the bottom of the satchel, marked with a single word in her father's hand. Rena. Her fingers trembled as she broke the seal. To my daughter, Rena, if you're reading this, I am gone. Know that I loved you and your mother more than my own life. I failed to protect you from the wolves at our door, but I leave you the tools to bring them to justice. You are stronger than you know. You are smarter than they will expect. You are a Mayhan, and that name has always meant something worth fighting for. The truth is your birthright. Use it wisely. I love you. Always. Your father, Edmund. The grief that broke through her was a dam finally giving way. 3 years of buried pain, of silent suffering, of swallowed screams, it all came flooding out in great, shuddering sobs that shook her entire frame. She barely registered Percy's presence until she felt his hand, awkward and uncertain, on her shoulder. I'm sorry, he said quietly. I can't imagine. He knew, Rena choked out. He knew they would kill him. And he still tried to protect me. Percy's hand tightened. After a moment, he pulled a chair close and sat, his presence solid and grounding. He didn't try to stop her tears or offer empty platitudes. He simply stayed. When the storm finally passed, Rena wiped her eyes with shaking hands. Thank you, she whispered, for finding me. For believing me." Percy was quiet for a long moment. When he spoke, his voice was low and honest in a way she'd never heard from him. "I didn't do this for justice alone," he admitted. "I did it because when I saw you on that floor, scrubbing marble in that house of vipers, I saw someone who refused to be broken." He paused. "And I needed to remember what that looked like." Their eyes met. Something unspoken passed between them. Understanding. Connection. The beginning of something neither dared name. "What happens now?" Rena asked. "Now?" Percy gestured to the evidence spread before them. "Now we prosecute the conspiracy. It will take years. It will be dangerous. But with this," he held up one of the ledgers, "we can bring them all down. Then that's what we'll do." Rena stood, her spine straight, her grief transmuted into purpose. "I want my father's name cleared. I want justice." Percy stood as well. "You'll have my protection, my resources, he hesitated, "my partnership, for as long as you need it. The court will expect you to marry this season," Rena said carefully. "For political alliance." Percy's mouth curved into something that might have been a smile. "Then I'm sure you'll choose wisely, Your Grace." "I've learned to be suspicious of expectations, Lady Mahon." A pause, a look that lingered a heartbeat too long. "As have I," Rena said softly. That evening, Rena stood alone in the library where her father had once taught her to read Latin, where her mother had sung while dusting shelves, the room where her childhood had been happiest. She was no longer invisible, no longer ashamed, no longer afraid. She was Lady Rena of Mahon, and her story was just beginning. A knock at the door. Percy entered, his face grave, holding a sealed letter. "This just arrived. By private courier." Rena broke the seal. The crest was unfamiliar. A serpent coiled around a crown. Inside, a single line in elegant script. "You should have stayed dead, little Mahon. Now we must correct that mistake." The air left her lungs. Percy read it over her shoulder. His hand moved to his sword hilt, his entire body tensing like a drawn bow. "They know," he said quietly. "The conspiracy. They know you found the evidence." Rena should have been terrified. A week ago, she would have been. But she'd already died once 3 years ago, in the ashes of her old life. She had nothing left to fear. "Let them come," Rena said, her voice steel wrapped in silk. Percy looked at her, and something fierce and proud blazed in his golden eyes. "Then we prepare for war." Outside, winter wind rattled the windows. Somewhere in the darkness, enemies plotted. The conspiracy that had killed her parents was vast, powerful, and now fully aware of the threat she posed. But Rena was no longer the frightened girl scrubbing floors. She was a queen who'd risen from ash, and she would burn them all down. Rena's story teaches us this: you are not defined by the names others call you. For 3 years, they called her Ash Girl and tried to make her believe she was nothing. But beneath the ashes, her true identity never died. It only waited for the right moment to rise. Your worth isn't determined by your circumstances. It's determined by your refusal to surrender who you are. No matter how long you've been in the shadows, you still have the power to reclaim your light. Drop a comment. Have you ever had to fight to reclaim your truth? What gave you strength? Share this story with someone who needs to remember they're stronger than they know. Like and subscribe for more powerful stories that remind you, you are unbroken. You are unforgettable. Your story, like Rena's, is far from over. Until next time, keep fighting for your truth.